Again, thanks everybody for joining us today at Gluware Intent. Next, we're going to do some demonstrations of Gluware and how Gluware is being applied for our customer Terracon. One of the first demonstrations we're going to work with is our configuration drift and audit. So with that, we'll turn things over to our maestro here, Alex, and he'll go through as how we're doing audit and drift.
So yeah, with config, audit, and drift, as it started out, it was just config drift, where we would take snapshots of your configuration, do comparisons, and send out notices when we detected any changes in your configuration. So with the now released config audit, we're also able to audit those backed up configurations, those backed up snapshots for unwanted and wanted items on your configuration. And this has full regular expression support, right? So for this demo case here, I created a set of rules, like one of them, a rule name is for banner. I want to make sure that my devices are required to have a banner login. I don't want to add anything to the forbidden, right? So you have some items to where you can provide what's required, what's forbidden, or both, right? So in the case of SNMP, right, I want to make sure that my SNMP matches exactly to a certain model, and I don't have anything that it has private or public, or it has a set of hosts that I don't want on there. So to run this audit, right, I can select a set of nodes, and I can go ahead and hit run audit. Now this audit is being run on a snapshot that was already taken at the time that you do a discovery on this device. You have the option to go ahead and capture a new snapshot, which the engine will go log into the device, pull on the latest configuration, and then run an audit on that. And you have the option to do, on your selection of devices, you can apply a filter or every single device that you have. You can also put this on a schedule, and the schedule has the capability of creating a dynamic map, right? So you can create a filtering that is dynamic, and as you add new devices or you remove devices from your inventory, that map is automatically updated and the policy is going to run against that map, right? So if you remove a device today, the device won't be audited. If you add a new device to your database, that device will start being audited as part of that schedule. So in this case here, I selected a few nodes. I'm going to select the audit that I want to run, and go ahead and hit start. So since we don't have to go to the device to pull out a new configuration, this runs much faster. Everything is running local, and it's just running against text files, right? And at the end of it, you're presented with the option to go see your results.
Now, Alex, quick question. You said the audit I want to run, as in I can have a whole bunch of different reports in there as I audit different parts of the config?
That's correct. So you can have multiple audits, and that's unlimited amount of audit rules that you can, or audit policies, as you want to may audit different type of devices, different type of configurations, right? And within those audits, you also can create an unlimited amount of rules per audit. Then you're also able to pinpoint or scope those audits to look at a specific location in your configuration. You don't have to say, look at my full config for this. You can say, I want to look at just banner, or I want to look at just SNMP. So you have the option to select those items to make that scope a little bit smaller and to speed up that process in what you're searching for. So, and you also have the capability of, you can export these audits and import it, and it's an easy export in JSON format that you can literally go in your JSON, and you can, go in a plain text file, and you can edit yourself if you want, and then just import it into a new device if that's what you want, right? So in this case here, I want to view results, and based on the policy that I created, you can have the results on a per device basis, right? So each device is going to tell you the number of violations that it has. In this case, this node has 62, and it will tell you what is missing, right? What's required. In this case, pretty much a good amount of them, a good amount of the items, the rules that I have on there are missing. And the amount of policies here, the amount of rules, can be different depending on the devices that you have on there. So, the next step is once you have these devices modeled, right, you also have, you can go and remediate this action, right? So if something is flagged, hey, this is a violation, I can go into my model editor and config modeling, and hey, I want to provision this device and put it back to the last standard, the way that it was, back to based on my model standardization. So when it comes to modeling, this is, it's pretty straightforward and simple. Any questions?
You just described a workflow process here that I want to dive into for a second. So
Okay.
I run an audit. I run whatever audits I want to. If there's a violation, something's out of compliance with what the rules say, I end up with a report, something telling me, hey, there's a problem with this configuration, and then I can go to that remediation step. So here's the question. Am I manually saying, okay, Gluware, go fix this problem that you found? Or is it an automatic thing where this is out of compliance and on some automatic cycle it's going to fix whatever is out of compliance?
Yeah, at this time, that remediation, it is a manual process. You just have to go to,
Schedule it, you can trigger.
well, you can have of course you can have your config modeling on a schedule that is constantly, right, checking. Anytime that there's a difference in your configuration, it does a reprovisioning. It puts back everything, right? So if you have it in that way, then yes. However, it does not have a trigger assigned to, I detected there's a violation on my audit. It does not trigger the modeling at this time.
Got it.
Right? It is a step in that direction, and as the customers get more comfortable with the platform, that would be the next step, is to automate that full process.
Another question here. You had mentioned results coming back in a JSON blob. Does that mean I can, from Gluware, send them to some other system and create a ticket maybe with that JSON data?
That's correct. So, one of the use cases that this was, this part was created on, you have devices that are managed by a provider, and you have devices that are managed by, your organization. Those devices that are managed by your provider, you can't configure it, you can't touch it. You can only read the configuration, so you can audit for things that are on there. And you're able to download this report, right, and send that report directly to your provider and say, hey, I have this device that's in violation, right? So then they're going to be able to log in and remediate it themselves, if you have a provider, that is.
And how about internally, if I need to bring in a security team or a compliance team, can I bring them into the workflow as well?
You certainly can, yeah. It's just a matter of downloading getting the same file and sending it to them. And if they have, if you've given that team access to do the read and write in the platform, they're able to go and remediate it themselves.
Yeah, just to finalize that question was, if you have, drift or audit scheduled, you can have a notification tied in where it can do things like an email notification to tell you have a violation or you have drift that occurred. So if you have certain people on a team that needs to get notified, you could hook it in that way as well. So the second part of what Alex is going to show is
And the other part that goes within here, right, is where you have drift, right? So with drift, and what you're seeing here is this is the full snapshot of your configuration. I can go and just make a very quick change here. Okay, and then I'm just going to run a snapshot on that device again, right? And so based on the configuration changes that the engine performs or it notices, you can get whether you get a notification. So with config drift, you have a history of all your configurations. That anytime that you run take a snapshot, you keep a full history of any changes that have been made. So in this case, right, the capture status, the icon that you're seeing above is where that's unchanged, and this icon that you see now, that's the one that it has changed, right? And based on the changes that you see, right? So I already had loopback interface on there, so that's why I didn't detect on the first one. As I added the description, you can see the changes that it has made. If that's the desired configuration, you can promote that as your golden configuration. You can download that configuration, But yeah, so you have a full history of basically any time a snapshot is taken. And within here, you can also do, you can change display mode to be able to see the full config or just pieces of that configuration.
So, any questions on drift and audit? We'll move on to the next use case. Any questions? Sure.
So everything that we looked at so far was, and correct me if I'm wrong, maybe I missed something, are configuration templates that were built. Is everything purpose-built from scratch when you work with a customer, or are there any pre-built best practices, like this is what a BGP config should look like, something like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And when it comes to the so-called kind of feature packages, the way it is built is that, generally, and again, 3.0 when we introduced it, we helped onboard and build it for you. In I think it was 3.2, we introduced onboard yourself, where it essentially reads in those features using a workflow wizard, and then essentially just builds those building blocks. But your question is also, well, what about other examples, and what about what is pre-shipped? We don't pre-ship it, but we do have the ability. The engine, and not in drift and audit, well, actually with audit, we can share audit policies. But in the configuration features, we have the ability to import, export packages. So we have built, Gluware has built numerous example feature packages that you could install and run. In fact, what Alex is running on here is something we call the VPOC. The VPOC is a set of devices that has all our example package configurations that are very turnkey. And let's say you even had a lab with like Cisco 1000V virtual routers, we could give you a bunch of packages that would just work with those devices with just very little editing. So part of it is that the playing with it, the learning it, the kicking the tires. When you actually enter a POC, like a proof of concept, where you want to make sure you're validating certain things to accept it into your organization, generally that's when we either help you to build those or show you how to build them and ensure it's going to meet your use case. So I know it's a fairly long answer, but it's a bit of both. There's some examples that we provide. We show you how to take them right from your configurations, and then there's a bit of customization that may need to be done to meet your very specific use cases. Yeah. Yep.
So our firm is financial services, and I'm going to struggle with this question a little bit, so bear with me. One of the struggles that we have is auditing changes, right? So IT, and this looks like a great tool to standardize, deploy the change. There's also a separate tool, the service manager, where your change request goes in, and then our governance is looking at another tool as well, like a tripwire. Right now it's very manual, right? Governance sees something in tripwire that changes, now you got to map that to a CR, then that CR they all need to reconcile each other. This looks like maybe something that our governance people could be using, or I heard the statement before that some of these commands can be exported to JSON and be used in other systems. Obviously, that's a very specific question, but in that type of a situation, how could this help reconcile those three different things?
Sure. There's really kind of two parts to that are, what organizations use the product, and then what about workflow when there's an actual, it's got to flow through different groups, and then sometimes you have ITSM, service managers like ServiceNow or something else tracking it and potentially needing an approval to make a change. And so, generally the tool is used, or the platform's used heavily by network operations, those responsible for the network layer configuration. Certainly as NetOps grows and they have, kind of break down silos, you get security and audit and other teams that are all using the platform as well and have logins and have certain roles and responsibilities they can do. So there's user management and roles and responsibilities that can be assigned. And the second piece of your question around service flow and service management, it's actually a nice tie-in probably to the last segment we're going to do after this use case, which is around API integrations, because, and there's another thing which is something we call in our product a workflow, where you may have to do pre-checks and it may have to go get an approval, and it may tie back to a pre-verification, a change, a post-verification. There can be API integration with platforms, let's say, that need a copy of the change, or the workflow where I need to make sure an approval was granted to make the change.
Those would either be API integrations today, which are somewhat custom. You'll hear more about APIs coming up, and as well as those pieces for approvals and things like that. So, yeah, I think it's generally Gluware addresses those things with a construct we call workflows and custom integrations. Okay, so with that, we're moving on to the second use case. So very quickly here, Alex is going to run you through what OS upgrade looks like, and it's been talked about a little bit before, but grabbing, TFTPing an image onto a box and typing reload, you would think could be like the simplest thing you could do, but an operating system upgrade is painfully process-oriented in terms of the pre-verification you have to do, the format of the image, the compatibility verification. Once you push the image onto the device, if it's past the checksum. I mean, there are just numerous failure points, and if you get it wrong and you reload that device and it's not a compatible image or the image wasn't whole, you just bricked it, and now, truck roll and resume generating event, right? Possibly, maybe. So we're going to take a look at how Gluware automates this process of the OS upgrade. So with that, we'll switch back over. And again, could be an OS downgrade, could be a patch. There's various forms of general operating system management.
Yeah, so again, with OS upgrade, currently it's, we're over here on the model editor. Eventually this will have its own application for OS management, right? So as the model editor is more of a sandbox place that we can create things and modularize everything. And once we kind of understand the processes of how we want to present this application, then we move it into its own application, which will be the next step. However, so right now I have this device. This is a Cisco 3925, I believe, that I want to run an upgrade on. And the three things that you have to create, right? So this is the minimum requirements. Since Gluware is not actually going to the Cisco website, we're not going to your repository server, we're downloading anything. You do have to provide your own images, right? Granted, based on the support images that you do have, or support contracts that you do have. You have to specify your location to where those images are located, and the protocols supported go from FTP, HTTPS, SCP, TFTP. With TFTP, we do make sure to optimize the file transfer, so we change the block size to be the largest it's capable on the device. So if it's by default it's set to 512, we make sure to check the configuration. We try to understand what's running on there, and we optimize it to speed up the file transfer process. But in this case here, I'm just using SCP. And you'll provide the image name that exists on that file server, right? And as you can see, I have different sets of different images, and it just so happens that for this combination here, I have the latest image desired, and I'm pointing to the repository server. Within here as well, right? You have the options to where you're upgrading, so if you want to do a ROM-on upgrade, there is also support to specify your ROM-on files, right? If you're doing an ASA upgrade, you can specify your ASDM files. You also can do an XOS upgrade, which is currently supported, in case you have to provide your management interface in order for the management interface to talk to the file server. So in this case here, I have the assembly already attached, or my firmware policy already attached to my assembly, and within there I don't have a catalog, but you have the option to create a catalog, and this catalog for your architects, this is read-write, right? But to your operators that are going to be doing the deployments, they can be read-only, so they can't touch your set of authorized images. So if that authorized image is part of an assembly and you try to do a provisioning to a set of devices, the engine is going to fail. That OS upgrade is going to give you an alert letting you know, hey, this image hasn't been authorized yet. For the process here, I've already done the file transfer just to speed up the processes, and I'll walk through the logs here. But essentially, as you do an OS management, right, you can schedule a you can schedule to do a transfer the image, or you can do transfer the image and reboot. And the transfer the image is something that, yeah, it's simply going to put the image, at the location in your device, puts you in a file system, and gets you ready so that you can schedule a upgrade and reboot, the transfer and reboot, which will set the boot statement and reload the box at a later date. So for this case here, I'm going to go ahead and do a start action. In case you can also provide, a service request number in the logs that can be downloadable if needed.
When you do an OS upgrade like this, occasionally there will be some new command or change in the next version. Is there an awareness that, hey, you're upgrading to this and that may change your standard configuration in some way?
Right. Currently, there is not an awareness of the command changes, right? So that is something that it is always, as recommended, you always put an image in a lab and you make sure that your commands still function before you go ahead and start pushing that image to your production.
A best practice is to run the drift afterwards, because
Yeah.
the drift will actually flag that change,
Yeah.
and then you can then update your policies correspondingly. Yeah, that's a good one, because sometimes you don't know of those changes, and that's a good thing. The drift will flag that. So we're kind of short on time, so we're going to just run through a quick highlights of what all the things the Gluware engine is doing behind the scenes in the log
Right.
here.
So as the engine logs into the device, right? First steps first is it checks make sure that you have a boot statement in your flash, right? It checks if you have the Cisco API enabled. It does check with the Cisco API, and it does make sure that the image that you're transferring is indeed supported by this platform. If you don't have the Cisco API access, the engine is going to trust that the engineer understands what they're doing and is going to put the image on there, right? But having the Cisco API access is definitely, highly recommended, and most customers that do have that kind of gear will have support. So you only need support for at least one device in your network, and you should be able to gain access. So as long as you have SmartNet at one device, then you can get the same access, and we can provide full instructions on how to get it. It's fairly easy. But the engine does put a file on there, right? It puts a lock file to make sure that if in environments where you have multiple servers, multiple engines, and it could be that hey, something is executed multiple times, and there's two OS upgrades going on one device. That lock file will let the engine know and make sure so that you don't have two upgrades going on at the same time. Moving on, the engine does check to make sure that the file does exist on there. So in this case, no file transfer is needed. If a file transfer is needed, we usually spawn off a second SSH connection to that device to kind of monitor the progress of that file transfer, right? And once that file transfer has completed, we'll go through the verify process, and then eventually we'll clean up the locks. Now, if I had scheduled to do a reboot on this device, the engine actually waits for the device to come back up, and it verifies that the image that you try to put on there is intended the image that you ended up with, right? So once the device comes back up, you will go ahead and delete that lock file, verifies it, and then it marks the upgrade as complete. In this case, it was just a bundle image. We do support full install mode as well, and if you have a device in a stack, like for example, if you have a device in the stack and you upgrade with just a binary with your bundle image, not the tar file. If you do a tar file, then the iOS itself will be intelligent to copy that image throughout your stack. However, if you provide just the bin file, right, the engine or the iOS will not be able to copy that image throughout your stack. However, we also added the code to be able to do that as well. And without having the need to go to the file server, we just copy it from the one server and complete it.
One quick point to Ethan is that we did this exact same thing with pre-Denali and post-Denali, that we modeled it to go and look at the configurations for NAC once you did pre-Denali, and it automatically fixed it. So we planned for that statement because we knew what would happen with NAC. But to your point is, you don't know a lot of the other stuff. Like we tested that, right? But to your point, we did plan that into our upgrade to Denali, post-Denali.
So that concludes the OS upgrade demo. Hopefully everyone, can appreciate all the complexity that goes into that.